YouTube dashboard that feels more like a judge than a tool. Numbers frozen, views barely moving, time slipping away, and in that stillness there is a quiet but heavy question echoing in his mind. Why do some videos explode into millions while others disappear into nothing? And just as frustration begins to settle in, he clicks on a random video, something unpolished, almost careless, and yet it has millions of views, thousands of comments, people arguing, reacting, sharing, and in that exact moment, something shifts. A realization hits not like a whisper, but like a shockwave. The game was never just about content. It was always about timing, about understanding what people are already looking for before they even realize it themselves. Because the truth is, the internet is not random. It feels chaotic, unpredictable, almost unfair. But beneath that chaos, there is a rhythm, a hidden pulse that moves through Google searches, YouTube recommendations, trending tabs, and social feeds. And that pulse is human curiosity itself, constantly changing, constantly evolving, driven by emotions like fear, excitement, anger, confusion, and desire. And the creators who go viral are not just lucky. They are the ones who learn to read that pulse, to predict it, to step into it at the exact moment it starts to rise instead of chasing it after it has already peaked. Imagine for a second that every search made on Google is like a signal sent into a massive invisible network, millions of signals every second, people asking questions, looking for answers, reacting to news, searching for solutions, and somewhere inside that endless stream of data, there are patterns forming, clusters of interest that grow stronger and stronger until they become trends. And those trends are not just numbers on a chart, they are opportunities waiting for someone to notice them early, to turn them into content before the rest of the world catches up. This is where most creators fail, not because they lack creativity or effort, but because they create in isolation, guessing what people might want instead of observing what people are already showing interest in. They treat content creation like art, when in reality it is closer to strategy, closer to analysis, closer to understanding behavior, and the difference between a video that gets 100 views and one that gets 1,000,000 is often not quality, but alignment. Alignment with what people are actively searching for at that moment. Google Trends sits quietly in the background like an underestimated tool, simple on the surface but incredibly powerful. When understood deeply, it does not just show what is popular, it shows how interest changes over time, where it is growing, where it is fading, and more importantly, it reveals those early spikes, those subtle increases in attention that most people overlook, and those small spikes are often the beginning of something much bigger, something that has not yet gone viral but is about to. And then there is the YouTube search bar, a place so ordinary that it is almost invisible, yet it holds one of the most direct insights into human intent, because when you start typing and the suggestions appear, those are not random phrases. They are real searches made by real people, repeated enough times to be recognized by the system, meaning every suggestion is a demand signal, a clear indication of what people want to watch. And yet so many creators ignore this, choosing instead to rely on assumptions rather than data that is literally placed in front of them. But finding trends is not just about tools, it is about observation, about paying attention to reactions, to comments, to the way people engage with content, because sometimes the most valuable insight is not in the video itself, but in how people respond to it, what they question, what they argue about, what they feel is missing, and those reactions reveal gaps, and gaps are where opportunities exist, because if people are confused, curious, or unsatisfied, they are already looking for more content whether they realize it or not. The deeper you go into this process, the more you start to see patterns everywhere, a breaking news story that suddenly dominates search results, a topic that starts appearing across multiple channels, a question that keeps repeating in different forms, and at first it might seem overwhelming. But over time your mind begins to filter it, to recognize which signals matter and which ones are just noise. And that is when you begin to move differently, not reacting to trends but anticipating them. There is also a psychological layer to all of this, because trends are rarely driven by logic alone. They are fueled by emotion, by urgency, by the need to understand something quickly. And if you can identify the emotion behind a trend, You can create content that connects on a deeper level, not just informing but engaging, not just answering but amplifying the curiosity that brought people there in the first place. And that is what makes a video not just watched but shared. Timing, however, remains the most critical factor, because even the perfect idea can fail if it arrives too late, if the trend has already peaked, if the audience has already moved on, and this is where many creators struggle. They either jump too early without enough clarity, or too late when the opportunity has passed. But those who learn to identify that early momentum, that moment when interest is rising but competition is still low, they place themselves in a position where the algorithm has a reason to push their content forward. And once you experience that moment, once you see a video gain traction because you aligned it with a rising trend, everything changes. Your perspective shifts. You stop seeing content as isolated pieces and start seeing it as part of a larger system, a flow of information and attention that you can tap into. And from that point on, you are no longer guessing. You are navigating, making decisions based on signals rather than assumptions. But even then, the process is never static. Trends evolve, platforms change, audience behavior shifts, and what worked yesterday may not work tomorrow, which means the real skill is not just finding trends, but continuously adapting, staying aware, refining your approach, and maintaining that level of curiosity that allows you to keep learning, because the moment you stop observing is the moment you start falling behind. There is also a hidden tension in this entire system, a balance between following trends and maintaining originality, because while trends provide direction, it is your interpretation that defines your content. And if you simply copy what others are doing, you become part of the noise rather than standing out. But if you take a trend and add your own perspective, your own insight, your own angle, you transform it into something unique, something that not only attracts attention but holds it. And that is where the real power lies, not in chasing virality but in understanding it, breaking it down, analyzing it, and then using that knowledge to create content that feels both timely and original. Because at the end of the day, people are not just looking for information, they are looking for experiences, for content that resonates, that feels relevant to what they are thinking or feeling in that moment. So the question is no longer whether trending topics can help you go viral, because they can, and they do, every single day. The real question is whether you are willing to shift your approach, to move from guessing to observing, from creating blindly to creating strategically, from reacting late to acting early. Because once you make that shift, you are no longer just another creator uploading videos into the void. You become someone who understands the system, someone who can work with it instead of against it. And maybe the most important realization of all is this: virality is not a mystery reserved for a few. It is a pattern, a process, something that can be studied, practiced, and improved. And while there will always be an element of unpredictability, those who consistently pay attention, who consistently analyze, who consistently adapt, they increase their chances again and again until what once felt impossible starts to feel achievable. And what once seemed like luck begins to look a lot like strategy. The moment you think you understand how trends work is usually the moment the system proves you wrong, because just as one creator begins to feel confident, another video appears out of nowhere, exploding overnight, breaking every assumption, ignoring every rule, and forcing you to question everything again. But if you look closer, if you slow down and analyze instead of reacting emotionally, you begin to notice something subtle, yet powerful. Something most people miss entirely. And that is this: viral content rarely comes from randomness. It comes from preparation, meeting the exact moment when attention is about to shift. There is always a build-up before a trend truly explodes. A quiet phase where signals begin to appear in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Maybe a few videos gaining slightly higher engagement than usual. Maybe a keyword starting to rise in search frequency. Maybe discussions appearing across different platforms at the same time. And these signals are easy to ignore because they do not look impressive yet. They do not scream viral. They whisper it. And only those who are paying attention hear it early enough to act. Most creators, however, are trapped in what can only be described as reactive mode, constantly looking at what is already viral, trying to replicate it, chasing views that have already been captured, entering a space where competition is at its highest and differentiation is at its lowest, and by the time they upload their version, the audience has already seen too many similar videos, the curiosity has faded, and the algorithm has moved on to the next rising topic. This is where the concept of timing transforms from a simple idea into a strategic advantage, because being early does not mean guessing blindly. It means recognizing patterns, understanding momentum, and having the confidence to act before there is visible proof. And that confidence does not come from luck. It comes from observation, from repeatedly studying how trends behave, how they rise, peak, and eventually decline. If you were to map out the life cycle of a trend, you would notice that it follows a curve, starting with a slow increase, then a rapid spike, followed by saturation, and finally, a decline. And each phase presents a different level of opportunity, but the highest potential lies in that early growth stage, where interest is rising, but competition is still manageable, and this is the stage that separates those who lead from those who follow. One of the most effective ways to identify this early stage is by cross-referencing signals across multiple sources, not relying on a single platform, but observing how a topic behaves on Google, YouTube, and even social discussions. Because when the same topic begins to appear in different places simultaneously, it indicates a broader shift in attention, a sign that something is gaining momentum beyond isolated interest. There is also an instinct that develops over time, something that cannot be fully explained but can be felt, a sense of recognizing when a topic has the potential to grow versus when it is just a temporary spike. And this instinct is built through exposure, through repeatedly analyzing trends, seeing what works and what does not, and gradually refining your ability to distinguish between noise and opportunity. However, even with the right timing and the right topic, execution still matters, because identifying a trend is only the first step. Translating it into content that captures attention is what determines whether it will perform. And this is where many creators hesitate, overthinking titles, delaying uploads, trying to perfect every detail, not realizing that in the world of trends, speed often matters more than perfection. There is a certain urgency that comes with trend-based content, a need to move quickly while the window is still open, because every moment of delay increases competition, reduces novelty, and shifts audience interest, and those who understand this do not wait for the perfect version. They create the best time available and release it while the topic is still gaining traction. At the same time, there is a balance that must be maintained, because moving too quickly without clarity can result in content that feels rushed or disconnected. And while speed is important, relevance and value cannot be ignored, because the algorithm may push a video initially, but audience retention determines whether it continues to grow, and if viewers lose interest quickly, the momentum fades just as fast as it appeared. This creates a tension between speed and quality, a constant decision-making process where creators must evaluate how much time to invest versus how quickly to act. And those who succeed are not the ones who always choose one over the other, but the ones who learn to optimize both, developing workflows that allow them to produce content efficiently without sacrificing the core elements that keep viewers engaged. Another layer to this process is competition analysis, not in the sense of copying others, but in understanding how different creators approach the same topic, what angles they choose, what titles they use, how audiences respond to each variation, because within that variation lies insight, and those insights can guide your own approach, helping you position your content in a way that stands out rather than blends in. You begin to notice patterns in successful videos, certain structures, certain emotional triggers, certain ways of framing information that consistently attract attention, and while these patterns should not be copied directly, they can be adapted, reshaped, and combined with your own perspective to create something that feels both familiar and unique, something that aligns with audience expectations while still offering a fresh experience. And then, there is the moment of uncertainty, the moment after you upload, when the video is live but the results are not yet clear, when every refresh feels significant, every view matters, and this is where patience becomes part of the process, because not every video explodes instantly, some take time to gain traction, to be picked up by the algorithm, to find their audience, and understanding this prevents unnecessary doubt and inconsistency. Over time, as you repeat this cycle, observing, identifying, creating, analyzing, you begin to build a system, not a rigid formula, but a flexible framework that adapts to different topics and trends. And within that framework, you gain control, not over the algorithm itself, but over your approach to it. And that control is what transforms content creation from a guessing game into a calculated process. So, as the screen refreshes again, as another video appears, as another trend begins to rise somewhere in the vast network of searches and clicks, the real question is not whether there will be opportunities, because there always are. The real question is whether you will recognize them in time, whether you will trust your analysis enough to act, and whether you are prepared to move when the next signal appears. Because in this space, hesitation is often the only difference between being seen and being invisible. There comes a point where simply observing trends is no longer enough, where watching from the sidelines starts to feel like wasted potential, because you begin to realize that the real advantage is not just in seeing what is happening, but in understanding why it is happening. And this is where most creators hit an invisible wall, because surface-level analysis can only take you so far, and to go deeper, you have to start thinking like the audience, not as a viewer, but as a participant in the system of attention itself. Every search, every click, every watch decision is driven by a question, sometimes clear, sometimes subconscious, and the creators who consistently go viral are those who learn to identify that underlying question before they even create the content. Because when your video becomes the answer to something people are already wondering about, it does not feel like content anymore. It feels like relevance, like something that needs to be watched in that moment. But here is where it gets more complex. Because not all questions are equal, some are too broad, too vague, too competitive, while others are specific, urgent, emotionally charged, and these are the ones that carry the highest potential. The ones that create a sense of immediacy, where people are not just curious, they are compelled to click. And recognizing this difference is what allows you to move from general content to targeted impact. You start to see how certain topics trigger predictable reactions, how controversy sparks debate, how uncertainty drives searches, how sudden events create spikes of curiosity, and how relatability keeps people engaged longer. And once you begin to connect these emotional triggers with trending signals, you unlock a new level of strategy, where you are no longer just following trends. You are aligning with human behavior in real time. There is also a hidden layer within YouTube itself, a feedback loop that constantly reshapes what becomes visible. Because the algorithm does not just respond to views, it responds to behavior, to watch time, to click-through rates, to how long people stay and how they interact. And this means that a trending topic alone is not enough. It needs to be packaged in a way that captures attention instantly and holds it long enough for the system to recognize its value. This is where titles and thumbnails stop being optional elements and become critical entry points, because no matter how strong your idea is, if it does not communicate urgency or curiosity in a split second, it gets ignored. And the difference between a scroll and a click often comes down to a single phrase, a single visual cue, something that makes the viewer feel like they might miss out if they do not watch right now. And yet, even with all of this knowledge, there is still uncertainty. Because not every well-researched, well-executed video succeeds, and that is part of the system, part of the unpredictability that keeps it dynamic. But what separates consistent creators from inconsistent ones is not the absence of failure. It is the ability to learn from it, to analyze what went wrong, to adjust, and to try again with more clarity than before. Over time, patterns begin to repeat, not in exact form, but in structure. You start to recognize similar trajectories across different topics, similar engagement behaviors across different audiences, and these patterns become your reference points, your internal database of experience that helps you make faster, more informed decisions without needing to start from scratch. Every begins to take shape, one that shifts your entire approach, and that is the understanding that trends are not isolated events. They are connected. One topic often leads to another. One question evolves into multiple follow-ups, and if you position yourself correctly, You can create not just a single viral video, but a chain of content that builds on itself, keeping you relevant even as individual trends fade. This is where momentum becomes a powerful